Have you ever been judged not by who you are, but by how you look? Imagine walking onto a plane, ticket in hand, seat fully paid, for only to be told you don't belong in first class. That's exactly what happened to Clara Carter, the mother of one of America's most powerful black CEOs. In front of strangers, she was humiliated, stripped of dignity, and forced to choose stay silent and accept the insult, or stand tall and let the truth be known. Now ask yourself, what would you have done if it were your mother? What if the person you love most was treated as invisible, unworthy, undeserving, simply because of the color of her skin? This is not just about one flight. It's about every moment we've all been underestimated, dismissed, or told we don't belong. And tonight, you'll see how one woman's humiliation turned into a movement that shook an entire industry. So stay with us, because once you hear what happened next, you'll never look at the skies or yourself the same way again. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, so you won't miss the rest of this powerful story. The late afternoon sun poured through the tall windows of Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport, painting streaks of gold across the polished floors. The concourse buzzed with travelers, families corralling restless kids, business executives glued to phones, couples whispering weekend plans. Amid the noise, Clara Carter walked quietly toward Gate C-17. At 70 years old, Clara carried herself with the gentle dignity of someone who had weathered life's storms without losing her softness. Her gray cardigan was a little frayed at the cuffs. She wore simple walking shoes and carried a canvas tote bag, the kind she'd used for decades to shop at neighborhood markets. There was no designer label dangling from her arm, no flashy jewelry to announce status. Only her boarding pass, seat 2A, first class. Clara approached the gate agent with a warm smile. "Good afternoon," she said, sliding her pass across the counter. Caroline Shaw, the young gate agent in a crisp navy blazer, barely returned the smile. She scanned the pass, frowned, and glanced up. Her eyes ran over Clara cardigan, tote bag, simple braids, then back down to the glowing screen. "Ma'am," Caroline said. Her voice clipped. "Are you sure this is your ticket?" Clara blinked. "Yes, dear. My daughter booked it for me. I've got seat 2A. Caroline leaned closer, lowering her voice as though sharing a secret. "First class is reserved for premium travelers. Sometimes, mistakes happen with the booking system." The words carried a polite tone, but the implication stung like vinegar on an open wound. Clara straightened her back, her voice steady. "There's no mistake. That's my seat." Behind her, a man in a tailored gray suit chuckled under his breath. "She's clearly in the wrong place," he muttered, loud enough for others to hear. The line shuffled uneasily. A couple of passengers exchanged looks, their eyebrows raised as if silently agreeing with him. Caroline pressed a button on her headset. "Janet, can you come up here within moments?" Janet Holloway, the gate supervisor, appeared. She was taller, older, with sharp eyes that scanned Clara the way one might scan a suspicious package. "What seems to be the issue?" Janet asked. Caroline lowered her voice. "She says she's in 2A. Janet gave a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Ma'am, may I see some identification?" Clara handed over her driver's license, her hand steady though her stomach tightened. Janet examined it, pursed her lips, and shook her head slightly. "This doesn't look right," Janet said. "Are you sure you didn't purchase an economy ticket?" "I know what I bought," Clara answered calmly. "Please check again." The line behind her grew restless. The man in the gray suit spoke again, louder this time. "Let's not hold everyone up. She obviously doesn't belong up front." Heat crept up Clara's neck. But she didn't flinch. She had lived long enough to recognize the sting of prejudice when it disguised itself as procedure. Finally, Janet sighed. Fine, board the plane. But if there's a problem, we'll have to reseat you. Clara walked down the jet bridge, shoulders squared, but her heart heavy. Inside the cabin, the first-class section gleamed with leather seats and polished brass fixtures. Clara approached 2A and began to place her tote in the overhead bin. "Excuse me," a voice cut sharply. It was Mark Peters, the flight attendant. His smile was tight, his eyes wary. "Can I help you find your seat?" "This is mine," Clara said softly. 2A. Mark glanced at her boarding pass, then at Clara again, disbelief flashing across his face. "I'll need to confirm with my supervisor." Before Clara could reply, Janet entered the cabin. "Ma'am, I'm going to ask you to step aside." "What for?" Clara asked. "There's been an adjustment. That seat is reserved for one of our priority guests." A woman in a pearl necklace and tailored blazer slid past them and sat down in 2A, as though the matter had already been decided. Clara's breath caught in her throat. She looked down at her boarding pass, then back at Janet. "But this is my seat." Janet's voice hardened. "Ma'am, you'll need to come with me. We'll find you another seat." Passengers nearby watched silently. A few shook their heads, but no one spoke up. Clara followed Janet down the aisle, her tote pressed tightly against her chest. The further back they walked, the smaller the seats became, the more cramped the rows. Finally, at row 29 near the restroom, Janet gestured. "Here you go." Clara slid into the narrow seat. The man beside her shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact. Whispered comments floated through the cabin. She probably tried to sneak up front like little cuts against her skin. Clara pressed her hands together in her lap, her back straight. She refused to cry. Instead, she whispered to herself, so soft it was almost a prayer, "Dignity isn't what they give you. It's what they can't take away." Farther up the aisle, a young passenger named Luis Moreno held his phone low, recording everything. He didn't know who the woman was. He only knew what he had just witnessed felt wrong, and with a tap of his finger, the first spark of a storm was set loose across the internet. The hum of the engines filled the cabin as passengers settled in, stowing bags and buckling belts. Clara Carter sat rigid in row 29, her knees brushing the seat in front of her, her tote bag tucked carefully beneath her feet. Around her, the air was thick with the chatter of families and the sighs of weary travelers. The contrast between the luxurious calm of the first-class cabin she had glimpsed and the crowded row she now occupied could not have been sharper. She inhaled slowly, telling herself she would not let this moment break her. It wasn't the first time she had been looked at as though she didn't belong. Still, the sting felt fresh every time. Mark Peters, the flight attendant who had redirected her, strode down the aisle, his polished shoes clicking against the narrow floor. His eyes flicked over her, almost daring her to speak up. She didn't. Instead, Clara folded her hands in her lap, her gaze fixed on the small window beside her. As the last few passengers boarded, Clara watched a man in a tailored blazer clearly accustomed to privilege slide easily into 2A. He barely glanced in her direction, already tapping on his phone, sipping the champagne flute Mark had offered him with a smile that Clara had not been afforded. Whispers floated back toward her row. She tried to sneak into first. Someone said, "Imagine the nerve." Another voice snickered. Guess the staff put her in her place. Clara closed her eyes, drawing on years of patience, years of reminding herself that dignity was not measured by seats or service. She whispered the words again in her mind. Dignity isn't what they give you. It's what they can't take away. The plane lifted, pressing everyone back into their seats. The young man beside her shifted, clearly uncomfortable with the space, and Clara adjusted slightly to give him room, even though it meant squeezing herself tighter. She had always made space for others, even when no one made space for her. 2 rows ahead. Luis Moreno angled his phone discreetly, capturing not only Clara's displacement, but also the stark difference in treatment between her and the new occupant of 2A. The young student felt a quiet outrage building in his chest. He knew what he was seeing wasn't just about a seat. It was about something deeper, something that spoke to the silent calculations people made when they looked at someone's skin, their clothes, their age. He drafted a caption flying while black, 2025. Same old story. He hovered over the post button, his thumb trembling slightly. Then he pressed it. Within minutes, notifications pinged on his screen, likes, shares, comments. The video began to spread like wildfire, carried by a current of collective recognition and indignation. Meanwhile, up front in first class, laughter and clinking glasses filled the air. The woman in pearls who had slipped into 2A reclined comfortably, stretching out as though the seat had always been hers. She accepted another glass of champagne from Mark with a casual nod, not once considering the woman who had been removed to make room for her. Back in row 29, Clara quietly unfolded a small paperback novel from her tote. She adjusted her reading glasses and opened to where she had left off. The words blurred for a moment as her mind replayed the last half hour, the skeptical glance of the gate agent, the tight smile of Janet, the muttered comment of the man in the gray suit. For a brief moment, she thought of calling her daughter, Evelyn, but she quickly dismissed the thought. Evelyn's schedule was relentless, filled with back-to-back meetings and high-stakes negotiations. Besides, Clara never wanted to be the reason her daughter felt distracted or upset at work. She had raised Evelyn to rise above unfairness, above small-mindedness, above the sting of prejudice. She would endure. She always had. The hours stretched on. Flight attendants moved down the aisle, offering snacks and drinks. When they reached Clara's row, Mark's demeanor shifted noticeably. His smile was perfunctory, his tone flat. Pretzels or peanuts? Water, please, Clara replied softly. He handed her a tiny cup without making eye contact. Already moving on to the next row, Clara held the cup in her hands, the condensation dampening her fingers. She thought of Evelyn as a little girl, clutching a juice box during their first trip together on a plane. Evelyn had been so wide-eyed, asking questions about the clouds, the engines, the world below. Clara had promised then that she would give her daughter the wings she herself had never been allowed. And she had. As the flight wore on, Clara leaned her head against the cool window, watching the endless stretch of sky. She whispered a prayer not for herself, but for her daughter, for every young person who would one day face these same silent trials. Near the front of the cabin, Luis uploaded a second clip Clara sitting quietly by the window, her face lit by the pale glow of the setting sun, while laughter and privilege rang out just a few rows ahead. The contrast was stark, undeniable. Viewers online began to comment furiously. This is America in 2025. Unbelievable. She deserves better. By the time the plane began its descent, the video had already crossed 1 million views. Clara gathered her tote, waiting patiently as the plane taxied to the gate. Passengers around her scrambled for overhead bags, eager to push forward, but Clara remained still. She would not add to the chaos. When it was finally her turn, she rose slowly, her joints aching, and made her way up the aisle. The man in 2A did not look at her as she passed. Neither did Mark. Caroline avoided her eyes entirely. But Clara didn't falter. She stepped off the plane with her back straight, her tote slung over her shoulder, and her quiet strength intact. In the terminal, the buzz of arriving travelers filled the air once again. Clara blended into the crowd, just another face in the tide of humanity. Yet unknown to her, the video of her quiet humiliation was already reshaping conversations across the country. Louis watched her disappear into the crowd, his phone still buzzing in his hand. He didn't know who she was, but he knew he had captured something that mattered, something that couldn't be ignored. And miles away, in a glass-walled office in New York City, Evelyn Carter's phone vibrated with a notification she would never forget. The night sky beyond the airport windows had turned deep indigo by the time Clara Carter stepped into the terminal. Her tote bag hung gently from her arm, the familiar weight grounding her as she walked among the swarm of travelers. She didn't rush. She never did. Life had taught her to keep her pace steady, even when the world tried to shove her aside. She paused at a row of seats near baggage claim and lowered herself carefully. The chair was cold against her back, but she was grateful to sit for a moment. The flight had left her tired, though she would never admit it to anyone. Clara glanced at her boarding pass again, the bold black letters still declaring Seat 2A, a piece of paper that said one thing, yet people had decided another. From across the terminal, Luis Moreno kept his distance, watching the older woman he had filmed hours earlier. His phone was buzzing constantly, the battery draining faster than he had ever seen. The video was spreading at a rate he couldn't control. 10,000 views became 50. 50 became 100. By the time he landed, strangers from across the country had already stitched it, duetted it, and shared stories of their own humiliations while traveling. Luis hesitated before walking closer. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said softly. Clara looked up, surprised, but her face broke into a small, kind smile. "Yes, I just wanted to say what happened to you on that plane wasn't right," Luis said. "I recorded it. People are talking about it already. You don't know me, but thank you for holding your head high." Clara tilted her head slightly. "You recorded it?" "Yes. It's online now. People are upset." Clara thought for a moment. She was old enough to know how fast anger burned and how quickly it faded. Still, she nodded gently. "Sometimes the truth needs to be seen, even if it's painful. I hope it helps more than it hurts." Luis's eyes softened. He hadn't expected her calm, her lack of bitterness. Most people would have been furious, but Clara's words carried the weight of someone who had lived too long to waste energy on rage alone. "Do you need a ride or anything?" Luis asked, almost awkwardly. "No. Thank you," Clara said. She lifted her tote bag. "My daughter's car service will take me. You get home safe, young man." Luis nodded, but his phone kept buzzing as he walked away. He glanced at the comments flooding in. "This breaks my heart. My grandmother went through the same. Name the airline." By the time Clara slid into the back seat of the black sedan waiting for her, the video had crossed 2 million views in New York City, inside a sleek high-rise office lit by the glow of Manhattan. Evelyn Carter was finishing her final call of the evening, the CEO of Horizon Tech and Horizon Airlines. Evelyn had learned to thrive in a world that demanded her to be sharper, faster, tougher than anyone else in the room. Her success was measured in billions of dollars in international deals, but she still carried the lessons of her childhood: stand tall, but never forget where you came from. Her phone buzzed again. Normally, She would have ignored it. She received hundreds of notifications each day, but the message preview froze her. "Is this your mom?" Attached was a video still. Clara, standing in the aisle of a plane, her cardigan wrinkled, her face composed, her boarding pass in her hand. Evelyn's chest tightened. She tapped the screen and watched. The shaky footage showed everything: the skeptical glance of the gate agent, the supervisor ushering her mother down the aisle, the smug expression of the man in pearls as he sat in Clara's rightful seat. And then, Clara being guided all the way to the back, near the restroom, her dignity intact even as the crowd whispered. Evelyn's throat burned. For a moment, the polished CEO veneer cracked. She wasn't the leader of a Fortune 500 company watching a viral video. She was a daughter watching her mother be humiliated in front of strangers. Her assistant knocked on the glass door. "Ms. Carter, the Tokyo call is ready." "Cancel it," Evelyn said, her voice sharp, colder than she intended. She closed her laptop, pushed aside her papers, and reached for her phone again. Her fingers trembled slightly as she called her mother. Clara answered after 2 rings. "Hello, sweetheart." "Mom," Evelyn said, her voice tight. "I just saw the video." There was a pause on the other end. Then Clara's gentle tone filled the silence. "I figured you would." "They humiliated you," Evelyn whispered, the words heavy. "On my airline. My company. How could they, Evelyn?" Clara's voice was steady, carrying the same strength that had soothed scraped knees and broken hearts decades earlier. "Don't do this for me. Don't let anger decide what comes next. I can't just let it slide. Mom, they can't treat you like that. They've treated others like that too," Clara said softly. "I've lived long enough to know. If you do something, do it for them, not for me." Evelyn pressed her palm against her forehead, her breath uneven. Inside her, 2 voices wrestled: the furious daughter who wanted heads to roll, and the leader who knew one decision could ripple through an entire company. She thought of board members, investors, employees. She thought of her mother's calm. "I hear you," Evelyn said finally, her voice low. "But this isn't over." Clara chuckled softly. "It never is. Just promise me. Evelyn, promise me, whatever you do, it fixes the problem. Don't just punish. Change it." The call ended, but Evelyn remained seated in the dark office, staring at the city lights below. She could feel the weight of her mother's words pressing against her chest. She had built her empire on efficiency, on precision, on measurable results. But this was different. This was personal. As midnight approached, Evelyn opened her laptop again. Reports of the video were already in the press. Headlines blazed across her screen. Black woman removed from first-class seat despite valid ticket. Airline accused of racial bias. Commentators demanded answers. Shares in Horizon Airlines dipped within hours. Evelyn Carter knew she had no time to waste. By morning, she would summon her entire leadership team. The world would demand accountability, and she would give it. But she also knew something else. Deep down, this wasn't just about accountability. It was about justice. The morning sun cast a pale light over Manhattan, bouncing off the glass towers and spilling into Evelyn Carter's office. She hadn't slept. The video of her mother had replayed in her mind all night, each frame searing itself deeper: the smirk of the gate agent, the cold detachment of the supervisor, the quiet way Clara walked down the aisle. By 7 a.m., the world already knew. News anchors replayed the footage with somber voices. Commentators debated whether it was racial bias or an unfortunate misunderstanding. But Evelyn didn't need analysis. She knew exactly what it was. Her assistant, a young man named Trevor, entered quietly with coffee. "Ms. Carter, you've got CNN, NBC, and the Times requesting a statement. The board is already asking for a meeting." Evelyn wrapped her hands around the warm cup, but didn't drink. "Call the board for an emergency session at 10. Everyone. No exceptions." Trevor hesitated. "Yes, ma'am. And your mother." Evelyn's throat tightened. "She's fine. She shouldn't have to be. But she is." When Trevor left, Evelyn swiveled her chair toward the window, staring out at the sprawling city. Her reflection in the glass looked tired, haunted. She remembered being a child in a grocery store, watching her mother be followed by a clerk who assumed she might steal. She remembered the way Clara had kept her head high, leaving the store without buying a single thing. Dignity isn't what they give you. Her mother's words echoed. The clock ticked past 9. Evelyn gathered her notes, her mind sharp despite her fatigue. She walked briskly into the boardroom, where 12 men and women were already seated. Conversations hushed as she entered. Screens along the wall glowed with paused headlines. Airline scandal erupts. CEO silent so far. Evelyn set her folder on the polished table and looked around the room. Her voice was steady when she began. "You've all seen the video." A few nodded reluctantly. One man, Robert Feldman, cleared his throat. "It's gone viral. Evelyn, over 10 million views overnight. We're being slaughtered in the press. Investors are nervous." Nervous, Evelyn's eyes locked on him. "They should be. Our employees humiliated a paying passenger, ignored her ticket, and reseated her based on how she looked. That alone is unacceptable. But the fact that the passenger was my mother," she paused, letting the words hang, "that makes this personal." The room shifted uncomfortably. Evelyn pressed a button on the remote, and the video played across the wall. Clara's calm face appeared, her cardigan slightly wrinkled, her voice steady as she insisted she was in 2A. The boardroom watched in silence as the crew escorted her to the back. When the clip ended, the room was heavy with unease. Evelyn spoke again, her tone colder. "That woman is my mother. The people you just watched dismiss her, humiliate her, treat her as though she didn't belong. They work for us." Gas rippled across the table. Some tried to hide their shock. Others shifted papers nervously. "Evelyn," Robert began carefully, "we have to consider optics. Investors will." "Optics." Evelyn's voice cut through him. "This isn't about optics. This is about the soul of our company. If my own mother isn't safe from discrimination on our planes, how many others have been treated the same without anyone knowing?" Another board member, Sandra Wu, leaned forward. "What do you propose?" Evelyn inhaled slowly, steadying her resolve. "Immediate suspension of every crew member involved, a full investigation, and a public statement today. No excuses. No corporate jargon. The truth." There was murmuring, but Evelyn raised her hand. "Understand me. This is not negotiable. I built this airline with a promise of dignity and fairness. We failed. Now we fix it." The weight of her words filled the room. Even those who had been skeptical nodded, sensing that resistance was pointless. As the meeting broke, Evelyn remained seated, her hands folded tightly. She thought again of her mother's words from the night before. "Don't just punish, change it." Her phone buzzed. It was a text from Clara. "I'm home safe. Remember, Evelyn's anger burns quick. Justice lasts. For a moment. Evelyn closed her eyes, allowing herself a single breath of vulnerability. Then she stood, gathering her folder. She had a company to hold accountable, a statement to deliver, and a storm to face head-on. Across the city, the press was already waiting, headlines refreshed by the minute. Reporters clustered outside Horizon Airlines headquarters. Social media pulsed with outrage. And in the middle of it all, Evelyn Carter prepared to turn humiliation into a battle for systemic change. By the time Evelyn Carter finished addressing the board, her phone had already begun to buzz with new alerts. Reporters camped outside the headquarters were demanding a statement. Investors wanted reassurance. And across the Atlantic, unions whispered about brewing unrest among crew members who feared for their jobs. Evelyn didn't flinch. She knew the only way forward was through transparency, and that meant facing everyone board, staff, press without hiding behind polished statements. At 11 sharp, she walked into the executive press room, the place usually reserved for quarterly earnings calls. Rows of cameras pointed at the podium, journalists tapping furiously at their keyboards. The air was electric with anticipation. Evelyn set her folder down, adjusted the microphone, and spoke clearly. What happened to my mother on Flight 482 is unacceptable. She was a paying passenger, holding a valid first-class ticket, treated with humiliation and disrespect because of how she looked. Let me be perfectly clear. This is not just about her being my mother. This is about every customer who deserves dignity when they fly with us. Her voice did not waver, but the silence that followed was almost reverent, effective immediately. She continued, the gate agent, supervisor, and crew involved have been suspended pending investigation. Horizon Airlines will launch an independent audit of all passenger treatment complaints over the last 5 years. We will not tolerate discrimination in any form, not from our staff, not from our leadership, not from anyone. This company was built on the belief that excellence and equity go hand in hand. We've failed. Now we correct course. Reporters erupted with questions. Evelyn fielded them calmly, never deflecting, never sugarcoating. A journalist from the Times asked if her mother planned legal action. Evelyn replied evenly, my mother doesn't need a courtroom for dignity. She raised me to believe justice is not a performance, but a responsibility. That's why we're acting now. Cameras flashed, the room buzzing. Yet Evelyn stood steady, letting her words anchor the chaos. Afterward, she returned upstairs where a smaller meeting awaited this one behind closed doors. Gathered in the HR conference room were the suspended employees Caroline Shaw, Janet Holloway, and Mark Peters. Their faces betrayed a mix of fear, indignation, and denial. HR Director Anthony Rhodes sat at the corner of the table, flanked by 2 legal counsels. Evelyn entered last, her presence quiet but commanding. Caroline, the gate agent, was the first to speak. Ms. Carter, I swear, I was just following protocol. The system must have flagged her ticket. I didn't mean anything by it. Evelyn's gaze was steady. Protocol doesn't ask you to question whether an elderly black woman looks like she belongs in first class. That was your choice. Caroline's face flushed. It wasn't like that, Janet. The supervisor cut in sharply. We had a priority guest. Corporate policy gives us discretion to reseat passengers when necessary. Evelyn raised an eyebrow. Discretion is not a license for prejudice. My mother had a valid boarding pass for 2A. Who authorized you to override it? Janet faltered. Her lips tightened, but she didn't answer. Mark Peters, the flight attendant, finally spoke, his voice low. I didn't mean to humiliate her. I thought she might be lost." "Lost Evelyn," repeated. Her voice was calm, but the words sliced through the room. She was in her assigned seat. "What made you assume she didn't belong?" Mark looked down at his hands, unable to answer. Evelyn allowed the silence to linger. It was heavy, exposing, undeniable. Then she leaned forward slightly. "You humiliated a 70-year-old woman. You stripped her of the dignity she had paid for and deserved. And worse, you did it publicly, in front of dozens of passengers. That humiliation does not disappear when the flight lands. It lingers. It wounds. Do you understand the gravity of that?" No one spoke. The ticking of the wall clock seemed louder than breathing. Anthony, the HR director, cleared his throat gently. "Ms. Carter, shall we move to next steps?" "Yes," Evelyn said, her tone decisive. She turned to the employees. "You each have a choice. You may resign immediately, or you may remain while we complete a formal investigation. But let me be clear, if the investigation confirms misconduct, your terminations will be for cause and will follow you for the rest of your careers. Choose wisely." Carolyn opened her mouth to protest, then shut it again. Her eyes brimmed with tears she fought to hold back. Janet crossed her arms defiantly, though her jaw tightened. Mark simply nodded, subdued. Evelyn stood. "You have 24 hours. Dignity is not negotiable. Not for my mother. Not for any passenger." Without waiting for a response, she left the room, her heels clicking against the tile. Back in her office, exhaustion threatened to press down on her shoulders, but she pushed it aside. There was more work to do. She picked up the phone and dialed Clara. Her mother's voice came through warm, steady. "Evelyn." "Hi, Mama." Evelyn's throat tightened. "I'm sorry you had to go through that." Clara's reply was soft but resolute. "Don't apologize for their ignorance, child. Just make sure it means something. Don't let it be another headline that fades away." "I won't," Evelyn whispered. For a moment, silence stretched between them, comfortable, grounding. Then Clara added, "Remember, Evelyn, this isn't just about me. It's about every mother, every father, every child who ever felt less than. Use your seat of power to make sure they never have to whisper to themselves just to stay strong." Evelyn closed her eyes, absorbing the weight of those words. "I will, Mama. I promise." As she hung up, Evelyn turned back to the window. Outside, cameras still clustered. Inside, the walls of Horizon Airlines trembled with unease. The storm had only begun. But Evelyn knew storms cleared skies as much as they shook foundations. And she was ready to rebuild, even if it meant tearing down everything that had been comfortable. By the afternoon, Evelyn Carter's words at the press conference had already traveled farther than any jet in her fleet. News channels replayed her calm yet pointed speech on a loop. Hashtags trended across platforms. Justice for Clara. Flying while black. Dignity first. The video of Clara being escorted down the aisle, coupled with Evelyn's revelation that the woman was her mother, set the internet ablaze. Talk show hosts debated the incident with passion. Some praised Evelyn for her decisive response, while others asked if her personal involvement blurred professional boundaries. But the public sentiment was clear. People were angry, not only for Clara, but for the thousands of unrecorded humiliations endured by passengers who lacked the power to fight back. At Horizon headquarters, Trevor entered Evelyn's office with a tablet in hand, his eyes wide. "Ms. Carter, you need to see this." On the screen was Luis Moreno's original video. Overnight, it had reached 20 million views. In the comments, strangers from across the country shared their own stories being ignored at the counter, questioned about their seat, or asked to prove they belonged in business or first. Stories poured in from teachers, veterans, nurses, and retirees, everyday people who saw their own pain in Clara's calm but wounded face. Evelyn scrolled through silently. A woman named Angela wrote, "My father was asked to move from first class to economy because the crew didn't believe he could afford the seat. He died 3 months later. We never forgot." Another comment read, "I was 14 when they told my mom to leave first class. We walked back in silence." This video brought it all back. Each testimony was like a stone in Evelyn's chest. The problem wasn't isolated, it was systemic. Trevor spoke softly. "You've got calls from the Secretary of Transportation, the NOACP, and 3 senators. They all want statements." "Schedule them," Evelyn said firmly. "But not before I address our employees first." She knew the crisis wasn't just external. Inside Horizon, fear spread among staff who worried they would be scapegoated. Rumors churned on internal message boards. Evelyn understood morale could collapse if she didn't speak directly to them. By evening, she stood in front of a live-stream camera that broadcast to every Horizon employee worldwide: pilots, gate agents, cabin crew, mechanics, call center staff. She looked directly into the lens. "What happened to my mother could have happened to any of our passengers." She began, "And let me say clearly, it has happened. Far too often. Maybe not caught on camera, maybe not shared online, but it happened. And every time it happened, we failed to live up to who we say we are." Her voice dropped slightly, carrying both weight and warmth. "I know many of you feel fear right now. Fear that one mistake could end your career. But this isn't about fear. This is about accountability. Accountability means we admit when we've been wrong, and we learn. This is our moment to be better, not just because the world is watching, but because it's the right thing to do." The message spread quickly. Some employees wiped tears as they watched. Others felt defensive, but even they couldn't deny the sincerity in her tone. Evelyn wasn't lashing out. She was inviting them into change. Meanwhile, outside the company, the storm raged on. Civil rights leaders demanded industry-wide reform. Editorials compared Clara's humiliation to the humiliations endured during segregation-era travel. Protesters gathered outside airports holding signs, "Dignity has no price. We belong up front too." That night, Evelyn sat alone in her apartment overlooking the Hudson River. The city sparkled, but she felt the weight of millions of eyes on her. For the first time in days, she allowed herself to cry, not just for her mother, but for every person who had carried quiet shame down narrow airplane aisles. She remembered being 12, sitting beside her mother on a Greyhound bus. A man had demanded they move seats, claiming the front rows were for important people. Her mother had refused, her chin high, her voice steady. Evelyn had felt both terror and pride, not fully understanding until now that those moments shaped everything she had become. Her phone buzzed. A text from Sandra Wu, the board member, lit up the screen. "Powerful speech today. You've turned this from scandal into movement. Proud to stand with you." Another text followed, this one from Luis Moreno, the passenger who had recorded the video. "I didn't mean to start a fire, but maybe this is the fire we needed." Evelyn typed back, "Sometimes truth has to burn to light the way." The next morning, headlines declared Horizon Airlines as ground zero for a new civil rights battle in the skies. The New York Times ran a front-page editorial titled, Dignity at 30,000 feet. Customers threatened boycotts unless changes came fast. Shareholders demanded reassurance, but also recognized that public trust was now the company's most valuable currency. Inside, Evelyn began drafting what she called the Dignity First Protocols. It wasn't just a policy. It was a blueprint for cultural change. Mandatory anti-bias training for every employee, real-time passenger feedback systems, anonymous whistleblower channels, and independent audits. She envisioned publishing quarterly equity reports, holding herself and her executives to the same standard as any flight attendant. Late that evening, as she finalized the first draft, Clara called, "How are you holding up, child?" her mother asked gently. "Tired," Evelyn admitted, "but determined." Clara's laugh was soft. "That's how I felt raising you." Evelyn smiled through her fatigue. "Mama, I need you to know this isn't just about what happened to you. It's about changing the whole system. For everyone." Clara's voice grew tender. "I know, and I'm proud. But remember, systems don't change with words alone. They change when people choose to see each other as human, no matter what seat they're in." Evelyn swallowed hard, emotion catching in her throat. "I'll make sure they do," as they said goodnight. Evelyn felt the storm outside calm slightly, not because the outrage was fading, but because clarity had settled in. This wasn't a burden. It was a calling. The world had seen her mother walk down the aisle of humiliation. Evelyn's mission was to make sure no one else ever had to. By the afternoon, Evelyn Carter's words at the press conference had already traveled farther than any jet in her fleet. News channels replayed her calm yet pointed speech on a loop. Hashtags trended across platforms. Justice for Clara. Flying while black. Dignity first. The video of Clara being escorted down the aisle, coupled with Evelyn's revelation that the woman was her mother, set the internet ablaze. Talk show hosts debated the incident with passion. Some praised Evelyn for her decisive response, while others asked if her personal involvement blurred professional boundaries. But the public sentiment was clear. People were angry, not only for Clara, but for the thousands of unrecorded humiliations endured by passengers who lacked the power to fight back. At Horizon headquarters, Trevor entered Evelyn's office with a tablet in hand, his eyes wide. "Ms. Carter, you need to see this." On the screen was Luis Moreno's original video. Overnight, it had reached 20 million views. In the comments, strangers from across the country shared their own stories being ignored at the counter, questioned about their seat, or asked to prove they belonged in business or first. Stories poured in from teachers, veterans, nurses, and retirees, everyday people who saw their own pain in Clara's calm but wounded face. Evelyn scrolled through silently. A woman named Angela wrote, "My father was asked to move from first class to economy because the crew didn't believe he could afford the seat. He died 3 months later. We never forgot." Another comment read, "I was 14 when they told my mom to leave first class." We walked back in silence. This video brought it all back. Each testimony was like a stone in Evelyn's chest. The problem wasn't isolated, it was systemic. Trevor spoke softly. "You've got calls from the Secretary of Transportation, the NOACP, and 3 senators. They all want statements." "Schedule them," Evelyn said firmly, "but not before I address our employees first." She knew the crisis wasn't just external. Inside Horizon, fear spread among staff who worried they would be scapegoated. Rumors churned on internal message boards. Evelyn understood morale could collapse if she didn't speak directly to them. By evening, she stood in front of a live-stream camera that broadcast to every Horizon employee worldwide: pilots, gate agents, cabin crew, mechanics, call center staff. She looked directly into the lens. What happened to my mother could have happened to any of our passengers, she began. And let me say clearly, it has happened. Far too often. Maybe not caught on camera, maybe not shared online, but it happened. And every time it happened, we failed to live up to who we say we are. Her voice dropped slightly, carrying both weight and warmth. I know many of you feel fear right now. Fear that one mistake could end your career. But this isn't about fear. This is about accountability. Accountability means we admit when we've been wrong, and we learn. This is our moment to be better, not just because the world is watching, but because it's the right thing to do. The message spread quickly. Some employees wiped tears as they watched. Others felt defensive, but even they couldn't deny the sincerity in her tone. Evelyn wasn't lashing out. She was inviting them into change. Meanwhile, outside the company, the storm raged on. Civil rights leaders demanded industry-wide reform. Editorials compared Clara's humiliation to the humiliations endured during segregation-era travel. Protesters gathered outside airports holding signs. Dignity has no price. We belong up front too. That night, Evelyn sat alone in her apartment overlooking the Hudson River. The city sparkled, but she felt the weight of millions of eyes on her. For the first time in days, she allowed herself to cry, not just for her mother, but for every person who had carried quiet shame down narrow airplane aisles. She remembered being 12, sitting beside her mother on a Greyhound bus. A man had demanded they move seats, claiming the front rows were for important people. Her mother had refused, her chin high, her voice steady. Evelyn had felt both terror and pride, not fully understanding until now that those moments shaped everything she had become. Her phone buzzed. A text from Sandra Wu, the board member, lit up the screen. Powerful speech today. You've turned this from scandal into movement. Proud to stand with you. Another text followed, this one from Luis Moreno, the passenger who had recorded the video. I didn't mean to start a fire, but maybe this is the fire we needed. Evelyn typed back, sometimes truth has to burn to light the way. The next morning, headlines declared Horizon Airlines as ground zero for a new civil rights battle in the skies. The New York Times ran a front-page editorial titled, Dignity at 30,000 Feet. Customers threatened boycotts unless changes came fast. Shareholders demanded reassurance but also recognized that public trust was now the company's most valuable currency. Inside, Evelyn began drafting what she called the Dignity First Protocols. It wasn't just a policy, it was a blueprint for cultural change. Mandatory anti-bias training for every employee, real-time passenger feedback systems, anonymous whistleblower channels, and independent audits. She envisioned publishing quarterly equity reports, holding herself and her executives to the same standard as any flight attendant. Late that evening, as she finalized the first draft, Clara called, How are you holding up, child? Her mother asked gently. Tired? Evelyn admitted, but determined. Clara's laugh was soft. That's how I felt raising you. Evelyn smiled through her fatigue. Mama, I need you to know this isn't just about what happened to you. It's about changing the whole system. For everyone. Clara's voice grew tender. I know. And I'm proud. But remember, systems don't change with words alone. They change when people choose to see each other as human, no matter what seat they're in. Evelyn swallowed hard, emotion catching in her throat. I'll make sure they do. As they said goodnight. Evelyn felt the storm outside calm slightly, not because the outrage was fading, but because clarity had settled in. This wasn't a burden. It was a calling. The world had seen her mother walk down the aisle of humiliation. Evelyn's mission was to make sure no one else ever had to. For days, Evelyn Carter had been the public face of the storm. She stood in front of cameras, in boardrooms, and before employees, carrying the burden of responsibility. Yet in living rooms across America, it was Clara Carter's quiet dignity that lingered. People didn't just replay the video for outrage. They replayed it for the way an elderly woman had whispered strength to herself, refusing to collapse under humiliation. News outlets began calling Clara directly, though she had refused every interview. "I don't want to be a spectacle," she told Evelyn firmly. "I'm not an activist. I'm just a mother who wanted to sit in her seat." But as the stories of others poured in letters, emails, videos, Clara realized silence could be mistaken for acceptance. One evening, she sat with her daughter at Evelyn's apartment. The Hudson shimmered outside, the lights of New Jersey flickering faintly in the distance. Clara sipped chamomile tea from her favorite chipped mug, while Evelyn scrolled through another flood of media requests. "They want you on Good Morning America," Evelyn said softly. Clara set the mug down. "Do they want me? Or do they want a headline?" "They want your story," Evelyn answered. "But Mama, it's not just your story anymore. It's everyone's. People see themselves in you." Clara leaned back, her gaze drifting toward the window. "When I was a girl, my own mother had to sit in the back of the bus. She used to tell me, 'Dignity is carried, not assigned.' I believed her, but the pain, it stays. Maybe it's time I say it out loud, not just to you." The next morning, Clara agreed to one interview, only one, and only on her terms. The producer promised no sensational cuts, no dramatic overlays, just her words, unfiltered. When the cameras rolled in the modest living room of Evelyn's apartment, Clara sat with her hands folded on her lap. She wore a simple blue dress and the same cardigan from the flight, now freshly laundered. The interviewer asked gently, "Mrs. Carter, when you were told to leave your seat, what went through your mind?" Clara paused, searching for words. "At first, I thought there must be some mistake, but then I saw their faces. They weren't checking a system, they were checking me, measuring me against their idea of who belongs in first class. And in that moment, I felt small, like I was 12 years old again, walking into a store where the clerk followed me down every aisle. But I remembered something I've carried all my life. Dignity isn't what they give you, it's what they can't take away. So I held my head up. I walked to the back of that plane, but I didn't bow." Her voice quivered slightly, but she pressed on. "What hurt the most wasn't the seat. It was the silence. All those people who saw and said nothing. I don't blame them. I know fear. But silence is heavy. It weighs on you even more than the insult." The interviewer leaned forward. "What do you want people to take away from this?" Clara's eyes softened. "That this isn't about me. It's about every person who's been told they don't belong. It's about the child who watches their parent humiliated and learns that dignity is fragile. It's about the man in uniform, the woman in scrubs, the teacher, the janitor, people who pay their money and expect respect, but are handed shame instead. I want them to know you belong. You don't have to shrink to fit someone else's measure." The interview aired that evening. Within hours, it became one of the most shared videos in the country. Viewers wept at Clara's quiet strength, her refusal to lash out, her insistence on humanizing the pain rather than weaponizing it. Hashtags shifted from anger to solidarity. We belong. Clara's voice, dignity is ours. Letters poured in thousands of them. A veteran in Ohio wrote, "I fought for this country and still got told to move to the back." Mrs. Carter, you spoke my truth. A nurse in Atlanta said, "When you held your head high, I saw my own mother." Thank you for carrying us all with you. Even children sent drawings of airplanes with hearts, scrawling, "Mrs. Carter belongs in the front." Carter. At Horizon Airlines headquarters, employees gathered in break rooms to watch. Some cried openly. Others shifted uncomfortably as her words struck too close to home. One gate agent whispered to another, "That could have been my grandmother." In that moment, Clara Carter became more than Evelyn's mother. She became a mirror. Evelyn watched from her office, her chest tightening with both pride and sorrow. She knew her mother had never wanted a stage, but Clara had turned her wound into a window for others to see themselves, and in doing so, she had given Evelyn's reform efforts a soul no corporate policy ever could. Later that night, Evelyn visited her mother again. Clara sat quietly at the kitchen table, a stack of letters beside her. She ran her hand over the envelopes as though each one carried weight. "You changed the conversation," Evelyn said softly. Clara shook her head. No, child. I just reminded people of what they already knew, that humiliation is universal. But so is dignity. We've all been small at some point. We've all been told we don't belong. I just put it into words." Evelyn placed her hand over her mother's, and you gave them permission to feel it out loud. For a moment, neither spoke. The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence, grounding them in the ordinary. Then Clara smiled faintly. "Now it's your turn. Evelyn, use this moment. Build something that lasts longer than outrage." Evelyn nodded, determination flickering in her eyes. "I will, Mama. I promise." And outside, as the city buzzed with headlines and protests, the Carter women sat quietly, one carrying the scars of the past, the other carrying the weight of the future, united in their mission to make sure no passenger ever again had to whisper dignity to themselves in the back of a plane. Evelyn Carter rose before dawn, long before the city stirred. The interview her mother had given still reverberated in her chest. Clara's words had softened the public anger into something deeper: collective recognition, shared memory, a longing for change. Evelyn knew this moment was rare, fragile, and powerful. Outrage burned fast, but reform required fire that could sustain. She made herself a pot of black coffee, sat at her kitchen table with a yellow legal pad, and began to write. At the top of the page, in bold block letters, she scrawled, "Dignity First Protocols." Her pen moved quickly. Step 1 training, not the generic, box-checking kind that employees rush through online. This had to be face-to-face, uncomfortable, personal. Bias doesn't break with a slideshow, she whispered to herself. It breaks when someone sees their blind spot reflected back at them. She wrote 40 hours of mandatory anti-bias and dignity-centered training for every employee, from gate agent to executive, repeated annually, not optional. Step 2, accountability. Evelyn underlined it twice. The protocols had to create systems where passengers could report mistreatment in real time, without fear their complaint would vanish into some black hole of customer service. She wrote equity hotline and mobile app, anonymous reporting. Every complaint routed directly to an independent review board within 48 hours. Quarterly transparency reports published publicly. Step 3, leadership rotation. Too much power breeds complacency, she murmured, jotting notes. Managers rotated every 18 months. Prevent entrenched bias. Fresh accountability at every hub. Her mind moved to passengers. What could they trust? How could they feel safe stepping onto a Horizon flight? She wrote, "Passenger advocate on board every long-haul flight. Independent staffer trained to intervene when conflicts arise. Protect passengers, protect crew, prevent escalation." The list grew. Partnerships with civil rights groups, scholarships for underrepresented youth training as pilots and crew, external auditors to monitor discrimination complaints. Evelyn's legal pad filled with ink, her handwriting sharp and urgent. By mid-morning, Trevor arrived, bleary-eyed but alert. He stopped short when he saw the pages spread across the table. "Is this all from today?" Evelyn nodded. "The beginning of the protocols. I want it codified, branded, and implemented before the week is out." Trevor blinked. That fast. Evelyn repeated, "Momentum doesn't wait. The longer we delay, the more people lose faith." He nodded slowly, his admiration plain. "I'll assemble the task force. At noon." Evelyn stood once again in the boardroom, this time with binders distributed to every member. The title page bore 3 simple words in bold, dignity-first protocols. She didn't waste time on preamble. We can't paper over this scandal with apologies. We can't just fire a few employees and move on. That's what companies always do. We're not doing that. We're going to lead the industry in systemic change. These are the protocols, and they begin now. She walked them through the pillars: training, accountability, rotation, passenger advocacy, transparency. At first, murmurs rose. Robert Feldman frowned. "Evelyn, 40 hours of training for every employee. Do you know what that will cost? Not just in dollars, but in downtime." Evelyn met his gaze, steady and unflinching. "Do you know what discrimination costs? In lawsuits, in boycotts, in public trust. The price of injustice is always higher than the price of prevention." Sandra Wu nodded in support. "She's right. This isn't just ethics, it's business survival. Our brand is dignity now, whether we want it or not." Other members shifted in their seats, realizing resistance would not only pit them against Evelyn, but against public sentiment. The motion passed unanimously by mid-afternoon. That evening, Evelyn convened a video call with civil rights leaders, union representatives, and community advocates. Her face filled the screen as she explained the protocols, not as corporate policy, but as a promise. We can't erase humiliation, but we can make it harder for prejudice to hide. We can build systems that force fairness to be the default, not the exception. And I need your help to hold us accountable. On the other end, voices agreed. One pastor from Atlanta said, "You've turned scandal into blueprint. We'll stand with you, but we'll also watch you." Evelyn smiled faintly. "That's exactly what I want." Meanwhile, across the internet, Clara's interview continued to ripple. Customers began to demand that other airlines adopt similar changes. Editorials called the Dignity First protocols a new model for corporate accountability. Evelyn knew that public enthusiasm could sour if promises went unmet, so she pressed forward relentlessly. At Horizon's main training center in Atlanta, instructors were already designing new workshops, role-playing scenarios where gate agents confronted their biases, where supervisors were forced to choose fairness over convenience. Mechanics, pilots, and executives were all included, no one exempt. Every uniform, every title, every paycheck carries equal weight in this. Evelyn instructed, "Discrimination doesn't stop at the gate, and neither will we." Late one night, as she reviewed drafts of the training modules, Evelyn allowed herself a moment of reflection. She thought of her mother, walking down that narrow aisle with her tote clutched to her chest. She thought of all the passengers whose stories now filled her inbox. She thought of herself, a 12-year-old girl on a bus, holding her mother's hand tightly while learning that dignity sometimes meant standing alone. "Not anymore," Evelyn whispered to the empty office. "No one walks alone again." The next morning, she gathered her executive team. "By this time next month, every Horizon employee will be enrolled in the protocols. By this time next quarter, we'll publish our first equity report. And by this time next year, if there's another incident like what happened to my mother, it won't be because the system failed. It will be because an individual chose to defy it, and that choice will have consequences." The room was silent, but it wasn't resistance. It was awe. Evelyn had turned grief into governance, outrage into order. And as she left the meeting, her phone buzzed with a text from Clara. "I saw the blueprint. You're building more than an airline. You're building a promise." Evelyn smiled softly, slipping the phone back into her pocket. A promise, she thought, that would fly farther than any plane ever could. The Dignity First protocols had barely been announced when the rumblings began. At first, they came as anonymous comments from industry insiders, idealistic but impractical, a publicity stunt, another case of overcorrection. Within a week, however, the pushback had grown louder, more organized. Rival airlines worried that if Evelyn Carter succeeded, their own customers would demand the same. CEOs who had once shaken her hand at summits now whispered behind closed doors about the danger of setting precedent. Evelyn knew the resistance was coming. What she didn't expect was how quickly it would escalate. At a private industry roundtable in Washington, she sat at a long mahogany table across from the leaders of the 6 largest airlines in the country. The room smelled of polished wood and expensive cologne. Power hung thick in the air. Thomas Whitford, CEO of Aero Global, leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. 40 hours of mandatory training equity reports every quarter. "Evelyn, you're setting a bar no one else can meet. You'll cripple your margins and make the rest of us look negligent." Evelyn met his gaze calmly. "If ensuring passengers are treated with dignity makes us look better than you, perhaps the problem isn't mine." A ripple of laughter went around the table, but it was sharp, not warm. Another CEO, Linda Garvey of United Continental Air, chimed in. "Your mother's story was powerful. Yes, but you're using it as a cudgel. One incident, however unfortunate, doesn't justify upending the industry." "One incident," Evelyn repeated. Her voice stayed low, but every word landed with precision. "Tell that to the thousands of passengers sharing their stories. Tell that to every child who's watched a parent humiliated in silence. This isn't one incident, it's a mirror. You just don't want to look in it." The tension thickened. Several CEOs shifted uncomfortably, unwilling to meet her eyes. Whitford leaned forward. "You're going to drag us all into regulatory hell. Congress is already circling. If you open this door, they'll walk right in, and none of us will have room to breathe." Evelyn didn't blink. Maybe that's what needs to happen. Maybe breathing has been too easy for those who profit while passengers pay with their dignity. The room fell silent. For a moment, no one dared to speak. Evelyn let the quiet stretch, then gathered her papers. Horizon isn't waiting for permission. Change doesn't need consensus to be right. With that, she stood, leaving the room before anyone could stop her. News of the confrontation leaked within days. Industry publications painted Evelyn as a disruptor, a threat to business as usual. Headlines split along predictable lines. Horizon CEO sparks tensions with competitors versus Evelyn Carter. Refuses to back down. Investors braced for turbulence. Back at Horizon headquarters, Robert Feldman expressed concern during a board call. "Evelyn, You're isolating us. If the industry bands together against us, we'll be squeezed out of joint ventures, frozen from partnerships, maybe even targeted in regulatory lobbying." Evelyn listened, then replied steadily, "Let them push back. Let them lobby. We aren't fighting to preserve an industry's comfort. We're fighting to preserve human dignity. Our passengers will see the difference. Our employees will feel the difference. That's the only leverage we need." Sandra Wu supported her. "The tide of public opinion is with us. Competitors may resist, but eventually they'll have no choice. People won't tolerate less once they've seen more." Still, Evelyn understood the stakes. Resistance from competitors was one thing, sabotage was another. She instructed Trevor to set up a special task force to monitor industry chatter, social media trends, and potential smear campaigns. "If they try to undercut us," she told him, "we respond with facts and transparency. No mudslinging, truth is enough." Meanwhile, Clara Carter remained a quiet but steady presence. She often accompanied Evelyn to late-night brainstorming sessions, offering gentle perspective. One evening, as Evelyn reviewed yet another negative editorial calling her reforms corporate theater, Clara placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder. "Child, remember when I used to tell you about pulling weeds in the garden?" Clara asked. Evelyn looked up, weary but curious. "Of course, you hated weeds." Clara smiled faintly. "Hated them. Yes, but I learned something. You can cut them down quick, and it looks neat for a while, but unless you pull up the roots, they come back stronger. What you're doing now, it's root work. It's slow, it's messy, but it lasts." Evelyn exhaled, her shoulders loosening. "Root work," she repeated. "That's exactly what this is." By the end of the month, the first results of Horizon's new initiatives began to show. Internal surveys reported that employees, while nervous, felt more engaged. Passenger satisfaction ticked upward, and the transparency report, the first of its kind in the industry, garnered praise from watchdog groups. But the backlash remained fierce. Aero Global quietly circulated a memo claiming Horizon's reforms were driving up ticket prices. Though the numbers were exaggerated, United Continental Air pushed regulators to investigate Horizon's equity app, alleging privacy concerns. Anonymous social media accounts began posting stories casting Horizon employees as victims of overcorrection, suggesting morale was collapsing. Evelyn met each attack with calm resolve. "The truth will stand," she told her team. "Let the lies unravel themselves." And slowly, they did. Independent analysts disproved the price hike claims. Passenger testimonials contradicted the morale rumors. And when a group of whistleblowers leaked evidence that rival airlines had coordinated smear tactics, public opinion turned sharply in Evelyn's favor. Still, Evelyn knew the battle wasn't over. At a family dinner one Sunday, Clara looked across the table, her eyes steady. "You've made enemies, child." "I know," Evelyn said quietly. "But sometimes enemies prove you're walking the right path." Clara smiled softly. "Just remember, don't let the fight make you forget the people you're fighting for." Evelyn nodded, the words grounding her again. This wasn't about outmaneuvering competitors or winning boardroom duels. It was about every passenger who boarded a plane with the simple hope of being treated as human. As she cleared the table, Evelyn's phone buzzed with a message from Trevor Call from the White House. "They want you at the Aviation Summit next month. Main topic, industry-wide dignity standards." Evelyn stood still for a moment, absorbing the gravity of it. The storm she had ignited was now headed to the nation's highest halls of power, and she was ready to walk straight into it. The email from Trevor was brief, but its weight was enormous. "The White House Summit is confirmed." You're on the main stage with the president. Topic: Aviation Dignity Standards. Evelyn Carter read it twice, then closed her laptop and leaned back in her chair. The walls of her office suddenly felt smaller. She had spent weeks bracing against rival CEOs, the press, and investors. But now the fight was moving to Washington, where words carried the power of law. The weeks leading up to the summit were a blur. Evelyn's days began before sunrise with policy briefings and ended well past midnight with calls to legal teams and civil rights advisors. She insisted the protocols be airtight before presenting them to lawmakers. "If we go in half-baked," she told Trevor, "they'll dismiss us as idealists. We need proof this works, numbers that speak louder than emotion." Anthony Rhodes, Horizon's HR director, compiled early data. Complaints of unfair treatment had dropped 37% in just 6 weeks. Employee surveys showed measurable improvement in workplace morale. Passenger feedback via the new app indicated a sharp rise in reported satisfaction. "It's early," Anthony admitted, sliding the report across the table. "But the trajectory is undeniable." Evelyn studied the numbers carefully. They were more than statistics. They were evidence that her mother's humiliation had sparked real change. "This is what we take to Washington," she said firmly. When the day of the summit arrived, Evelyn stepped out of a black car into the driveway of the White House. The building glowed white against a clear blue sky, its columns tall and unyielding. Protesters gathered at the gates, waving signs with slogans that echoed her mother's words: "Dignity isn't negotiable. We belong." Reporters jostled for photos as she walked past, her navy suit sharp, her stride deliberate. Inside, the East Room buzzed with anticipation. Rows of seats filled with lawmakers, journalists, and corporate leaders. Cameras lined the walls. At the front sat the President of the United States, flanked by advisors. Evelyn felt the weight of history pressing on her shoulders, but she didn't falter. She thought of Clara, of the aisle walk that had ignited all of this, and steadied herself. The president opened with brief remarks. "The skies connect us as a nation, but connection means nothing without dignity. We are here today to discuss what dignity looks like at 30,000 feet and how to guarantee it for every passenger." Then Evelyn was called to the podium. She adjusted the microphone and let her gaze sweep the room. 6 weeks ago, my mother was told she didn't belong in first class. She held a valid ticket. She had every right to her seat. Yet she was judged not by her boarding pass, but by her appearance. What happened to her was not unique. It was simply recorded. She let the words sink in. A hush fell over the room. We at Horizon Airlines responded with the Dignity First Protocol's mandatory anti-bias training, anonymous reporting systems, management rotation, independent passenger advocates, quarterly transparency reports. Already, complaints are down, trust is rising, and we are proving what should have been obvious all along. Dignity is good for business, and even better for humanity. Her tone sharpened as she continued, "But let me be clear, one airline cannot carry this alone. This must become the industry standard. Every passenger, on every airline, deserves to know they will be treated as human, no matter what seat they paid for, no matter the color of their skin, their accent, or their age." The applause began cautiously, then swelled. Reporters scribbled furiously. Rival CEOs shifted in their seats, tight smiles masking their irritation. When Evelyn stepped down, lawmakers took the floor. Senator Grace Montgomery from Illinois spoke passionately. "This is not just an aviation issue. This is a civil rights issue. The right to travel with dignity should not be negotiable in 2025 any more than it was in 1965. But resistance soon surfaced. Thomas Whitford of Aero Global stood and spoke to the room. With respect, these protocols impose massive costs. They threaten efficiency and jeopardize competitiveness. If the government codifies them, smaller carriers will collapse under the burden. Evelyn turned slightly in her chair, her eyes steady on him. Smaller carriers collapse under scandal too. Thomas, efficiency means nothing if passengers feel unsafe in their own seats. The exchange was televised live, clips flooding social media within minutes. Hashtags like Bar Evelyn V's Whitford and Dignity debate trended as Americans watched corporate power clash with moral responsibility in real time. After hours of testimony and debate, the president concluded, "We've heard the arguments. We've seen the data. What Horizon has begun will shape the future of aviation. My administration will establish a task force to evaluate adopting dignity standards industry-wide, and we will expect full cooperation from every carrier." The room erupted in applause again. For Evelyn, it was a victory, though she knew it was only the first step. Laws move slowly, but culture moves slower. Both needed constant pressure. That evening, back in her hotel room, Evelyn sat by the window overlooking Pennsylvania Avenue. She removed her heels and let herself breathe for the first time all day. Clara called just after 10. "I watched every minute." Her mother said softly, "You held your ground, child. You looked them in the eye and didn't flinch." Evelyn smiled tiredly. "I thought of you, Mama. Walking down that aisle, it kept me steady." "You did more than steady," Clara replied. "You turned humiliation into history. Whatever comes next, remember you've already changed the story." Evelyn closed her eyes, letting the words sink in. For the first time since the ordeal began, she felt something more than determination. She felt hope. The summit had not ended the fight, but it had shifted the battlefield. No longer was this just Horizon's scandal. It was America's conversation. And Evelyn Carter was ready to lead it. One step, one seat, one passenger at a time. The summit had ignited a storm, but it was the weeks that followed which tested Evelyn Carter most. Legislation would take time, but culture demanded immediate attention. Horizon Airlines had been thrust under a microscope, and every decision Evelyn made now was amplified, scrutinized, and debated across news channels and social media feeds. She knew if the company slipped even once, skeptics like Thomas Whitford would pounce. Back at Horizon headquarters in Atlanta, Evelyn convened a town hall. The auditorium overflowed with employees, pilots still in uniform, flight attendants clutching coffee cups, ground staff with tired eyes. Cameras streamed the event live to break rooms and laptops across the country. Evelyn walked on stage, no podium between her and the people. "I know many of you are tired," she began. "Tired of the headlines, tired of the questions. Some of you are even afraid, wondering if your jobs are at risk because of changes we've made. Let me be clear, this is not about punishing. This is about rebuilding. Not with fear, but with respect." She paused, letting the words settle. In the front row, a flight attendant shifted uncomfortably, and Evelyn caught it. "We failed my mother, Clara Carter," she continued. "But in failing her, we failed ourselves. If Horizon becomes a company where dignity isn't automatic, then we're not worthy of our own wings." Applause rippled through the room. Evelyn then introduced the next phase of reform, a restorative program she called the Compass Initiative. "The compass," she explained, "always points true north, but only if it isn't magnetized by prejudice. We're going to help each other find our true north again." The initiative included intensive anti-bias workshops, role-play scenarios, peer-led discussions, and even immersion days where staff shadowed colleagues in different roles to understand perspectives. Evelyn emphasized it wasn't optional. Every single employee, from janitors to executives, would participate. But most controversial was the second chance path, rather than permanently banishing those who had failed. Evelyn created a route for genuine redemption. Employees who had been suspended like Caroline Shaw, the gate agent, and Janet Holloway. The supervisor were offered the chance to return only if they completed a rigorous process. Personal apologies, community service, extended retraining, and mentorship under senior advocates of diversity. Critics called it naive. Commentators mocked Evelyn as the CEO who forgives too much. Yet she stood firm. If we demand transformation, we must also believe in it. She told her board, "Otherwise, we're no better than those who judged my mother without believing she belonged." The first real test of the Compass Initiative came during Caroline Shaw's public return. Cameras gathered as she stood in front of employees and passengers to deliver her apology. Her voice shook at first. "I looked at Mrs. Carter and didn't see a customer. I saw a stereotype I had absorbed without realizing it. I was wrong. I humiliated her, and I humiliated myself. I can't undo it, but I can choose differently from here on." Clara Carter herself attended, sitting quietly in the front row. When Caroline finished, Clara rose, walked onto the stage, and embraced her. The audience gasped, then erupted in applause. "Redemption isn't weakness," Clara whispered into the microphone. "It's courage." That moment was replayed thousands of times online. Hashtag shifted from anger to possibility. Your redemption flight. Compass true north. Even skeptics had to admit it was powerful. Meanwhile, Evelyn pushed reforms deeper. Pilots went through leadership empathy training. Ground crews attended workshops on unconscious bias. Horizon began publishing quarterly dignity reports with transparency on complaints and resolutions. Employee advocates were appointed on every base. One evening, as Evelyn walked through the concourse at Hartsfield-Jackson, she noticed a pilot kneeling down to help a wheelchair passenger adjust their seatbelt. A gate agent offered to carry a child's backpack after seeing the boy struggling. They weren't grand gestures, but they spoke volumes. The culture was shifting not because of a memo, but because people began to hold themselves to higher standards. Evelyn's board noticed the difference too. Revenue numbers had stabilized, then climbed. Customer surveys used words like safe, valued, and seen. Investors who had once threatened to pull out now praised Horizon as the airline of integrity. Yet Evelyn's path wasn't without shadows. One night, alone in her office, she reread hate mail she had received, letters accusing her of weaponizing race, of turning airlines into therapy centers. Some threatened boycotts. A few dripped with outright racism. She folded them carefully and tucked them into a drawer labeled noise. Her inner voice whispered, "Stay the course." Still, doubt gnawed at her. Was she overreaching? Could one airline really shift an entire industry's mindset? She remembered her mother's words. "You turned humiliation into history." That became her mantra. Several months later, Horizon hosted its first Dignity Summit in Atlanta, inviting employees, passengers, community leaders, and even competitors. Panels featured former critics like Caroline alongside advocates, sharing raw stories of failure and growth. Media outlets broadcast highlights nationwide. During the closing, Evelyn took the stage beside Clara once again. "We began this journey because of one seat," she told the audience. "One seat denied. But dignity isn't about one seat, it's about every seat. From the front row to the last row, from the captain's chair to the baggage cart. Either everyone belongs, or no one truly does. The crowd rose in a standing ovation. The Compass initiative was not flawless. Some employees quit rather than change. A few failed the redemption path and were dismissed permanently, but the majority embraced it, and those who returned became some of its fiercest champions. Caroline later mentored new hires, teaching them not just procedures but perspective. Janet, once defensive, became a speaker at diversity conferences. For Evelyn, these transformations were proof that systemic reform didn't have to crush individuals, it could lift them. She believed redemption, accountability, and justice could coexist. As the year closed, Horizon reported its highest satisfaction scores in company history. Clara finally boarded another first-class flight this time, surrounded by staff who greeted her warmly, as if she were family. She smiled, settled into her seat, and whispered to her daughter, "It feels different now." Evelyn nodded. "That's the point, Mama. It has to feel different for everyone." It was nearly a year to the day since Clara Carter had been told to leave her first-class seat. The memory of that moment still burned inside Evelyn, but the fire had become something else, a steady light guiding her steps. Horizon Airlines was no longer simply recovering from scandal. It had become a symbol of how dignity could reshape an entire industry. Yet Evelyn knew the final test was still ahead, ensuring the change would outlast her leadership. On a crisp spring morning, she returned to Washington, D.C., this time not for a defensive summit, but for a celebration. Congress had just passed the Air Passenger Dignity Act with bipartisan support, requiring every U.S. airline to adopt transparency protocols, anti-bias training, and independent complaint systems modeled on Horizon's reforms. Evelyn stood on the steps of the Capitol beside Senator Grace Montgomery as flashbulbs popped. "This isn't my victory," Evelyn told the press. "It belongs to every passenger who was ever told they didn't belong. It belongs to every worker brave enough to admit mistakes and choose better. And it belongs to my mother, Clara, who endured humiliation so the rest of us could build a different future." Clara, standing nearby, wiped a quiet tear. Inside Horizon, the changes had crystallized into a new culture. At headquarters, the walls displayed a mural titled "Every Seat," counts a collage of photographs from passengers and crew, from children boarding their first flight to veterans returning home. Employees often paused in the halls to look at it, sometimes pointing out familiar faces. It became a living testament to the company's mission. Financial analysts who once predicted Horizon's downfall now marveled at its rise. Profits had climbed steadily, fueled not just by customer loyalty, but by new partnerships. Universities studied Horizon's case as a model of corporate accountability. Nonprofits invited Evelyn to speak about redemption and reform, but Evelyn's heart remained grounded in the personal. She never forgot the letters from strangers, a Latina grandmother who described being dismissed by airline staff for decades, a young Asian American man who said he finally felt safe traveling, a white mother who admitted she had laughed at passengers in the past, but now taught her children to do better. Each story reminded Evelyn that change rippled outward, far beyond quarterly reports. One afternoon, Caroline Shaw, once the disgraced gate agent, knocked on Evelyn's office door. She carried a binder full of notes. "I've been mentoring new hires," she explained. "But I think we can do more. What if Horizon built a formal curriculum, a training that doesn't just correct bias, but builds empathy?" From day one, Evelyn flipped through the binder, impressed. Caroline's ideas were detailed, thoughtful, passionate. "You've come a long way," Evelyn said. Caroline's eyes filled with emotion. "I had to face who I was, and then you gave me a chance to become someone else. I don't take that lightly." That evening, Evelyn shared the encounter with Clara over dinner. Clara chuckled softly. "Sometimes the people who hurt us most are the ones who teach us the most." "I'm glad you saw that. Not everyone had chosen redemption." Janet Holloway eventually resigned. Admitting the process forced her to confront too many uncomfortable truths. But even her departure carried honesty rather than denial, and Evelyn respected it. Mark Peters, the flight attendant who had stood by silently, became one of the strongest advocates for change. "Silence is complicity," he told recruits, "and I won't make that mistake again." By the year's end, Horizon hosted a gala to honor employees who embodied its values. Among the honorees was Luis Moreno, the passenger whose video had first exposed the injustice. Evelyn presented him with a plaque. Sometimes, history is recorded not by leaders, but by witnesses, she said. Luis smiled humbly, admitting he had only pressed record because something felt wrong. As the crowd applauded, Evelyn glanced across the ballroom at her mother. Clara looked regal in a dark green gown, her posture straight, her eyes bright. Evelyn thought back to that first humiliating walk down the airplane aisle, then to this triumphant night. The distance between the two was immeasurable, and yet inseparably linked. In quieter moments, Evelyn wrestled with her own doubts. She knew critics still existed. Some claimed Horizon's model was unsustainable. Others accused her of exploiting her mother's pain for publicity. She sometimes lay awake, staring at the ceiling, asking herself whether she had done enough or pushed too hard. But each morning she rose, reminded that the work was larger than herself. Clara remained her compass. On Evelyn's birthday, Clara handed her a wrapped box. Inside was a framed photograph, not of the Capitol, not of a gala, but of the two of them sitting on a porch swing years earlier, long before Horizon or scandal. Clara smiled. "Don't forget who you were, before the world tried to tell you who you should be." Evelyn held the photo close. "I won't, Mama." The final twist in Horizon's journey came when rival CEO Thomas Whitford, who had once sneered at Evelyn in the East Room, reached out privately. He asked for a meeting. Evelyn hesitated but agreed. Over coffee in New York. Thomas admitted Aero Global was facing lawsuits over discrimination. "We can't keep fighting this," he said, weary. "You were right. Will you help us build something better?" Evelyn studied him for a long moment. Part of her wanted to reject him outright, but another part, the part her mother had nurtured, saw an opportunity. "I'll help," she said finally, "but not for you, for the passengers. And you'll need to listen, not just nod." It was a moment of reluctant alliance, a signal that the culture shift was bigger than Horizon. Evelyn realized then that the real victory wasn't forcing rivals to bow, but persuading them to change. The story came full circle the day Clara once again boarded a first-class cabin, this time on a Horizon flight bound for Los Angeles. The crew greeted her warmly, offering genuine smiles, helping with her luggage, even calling her by name. Other passengers, recognizing her from news stories, whispered respectfully but didn't intrude. Clara settled into her seat and closed her eyes, breathing deeply. For the first time in years, she felt peace in the air. As the plane took off, Evelyn, sitting beside her, looked out the window at the clouds. "Do you think it's enough, Mama, that we've done what we set out to do?" Clara reached over and squeezed her hand. "It will never be enough," she said gently. But it's more than we had, and it's a start. Sometimes a start is all the world needs. Evelyn nodded, her chest tight with emotion. She knew the fight for dignity would never truly end. But she also knew the legacy of this year, the humiliation, the struggle, the reforms, the redemption would live on, not just in Horizon Airlines, but in every flight where a passenger felt they belonged. When the plane reached cruising altitude, Clara leaned back with a faint smile. "Feels different now," she murmured. Evelyn smiled too. "That's the point. Mama, it has to." The story of Clara and Evelyn Carter reminds us that dignity is not a privilege, it is a birthright. Too often, people are judged by appearances, background, or stereotypes rather than the truth of who they are. For older generations especially, this story echoes decades of painful experiences where respect had to be demanded instead of freely given. But it also shows something deeper, that injustice, when confronted with courage and compassion, can be transformed into lasting change. Evelyn did not stop at punishing those who wronged her mother. She chose to reform an entire system so others would never face the same humiliation. The lesson is simple yet profound. We may not control how the world treats us, but we can choose how we respond. Do we carry bitterness, or do we turn pain into purpose for families, communities, and nations? The Carter story is a reminder that healing comes not only from justice delivered, but also from hope restored. In our daily lives, whether with a neighbor, a stranger, or our own loved ones, we all have the power to affirm someone's worth. And sometimes, that simple act of respect can change the course of a life. Thank you so much for watching and sharing this journey with us. Stories like these matter because they remind us of the power of dignity, courage, and compassion. If this story touched you, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that inspire and move hearts. Your support means the world to us, and together, we can keep these conversations alive.